In this lesson, we'll be creating a mountain landscape. We'll be putting together a lot of elements from other lessons that we've already practiced, and you'll see how important it is to do some planning about your shapes and your values and your colors ahead of time. Also, you'll see me use some masking fluid to create the moon on this painting. I just want to let you know that I'll be explaining that more in another lesson. By now, we're really familiar with thinking of our painting in thirds, thinking of our rectangle divided into some sweet spots. And as we plan our paintings, we think about where we want our viewer's eye to go. For this painting of a mountain landscape, let's think about where we want our viewer to wander in the mountains with us. I'm going to put my biggest mountain right here at the upper left-hand sweet spot. So I can just make a simple profile of that mountain. And I want to think about the foreground as well. I want to use some time in this painting to really play around with the textures of our foreground. And so that'll be down in this lower third. And I think I'm going to have our viewers go with us into this mountain scene. First of all, by bringing a tree line, some lower foothills, makes an interesting shape below the mountain, maybe coming down this way. I could superimpose over that a darker value closer to the viewer that maybe comes down over this direction of some trees. And right in this spot would be where my viewer could literally go. If I put a trail or stream going towards this spot, that's literally the focus point for that painting. When I look at this overall design, I'm thinking about the value of it. This mountain I want to be, let's say, kind of in mid-range. I want you to be able to see it. It won't be as light as our misty morning painting, but the layers of trees in front of that are going to be darker, so I'll put my lines closer together to show you that value of this hill coming down. And these trees are going to be the darkest. And I'm going to try to make sort of an interesting shape out of that tree line coming down here and bringing my viewer's eye right down to here. In terms of the foreground, I'm going to leave it lighter than these trees, but let's put some shrubbery or some sort of bushes down in this area where this path, let's make this a path, goes. And so to just kind of indicate that I'm going to put some textured shrubs and scrubby stuff down here, I'll just make some squiggles like that. And I will put some little circles in my sketch to remind us that we want to put some texture in there. We want this to look like just the rocky Colorado landscape that we're going to hike into. I'm looking over all this painting, and I can use my sky now as one of my characters. So I'm going to think about where I want clouds to go, or in this case, how about if we mask off a little spot where the rising moon could be, or could be a sun. I'll make it a pretty big circle, and just because I want you to realize I'm actually making a design on paper, not trying to be super realistic about every little detail. If I'm going to do a moon like that, to have it show off, I think I want it to be white paper. What'll really make the moon sing is if there's a darker value behind it. But what direction I have that darker cloud band is going to be part of my design. Can you see how I've got a sort of a zigzag here? I've got a diagonal coming down, a diagonal going out, another diagonal coming down. I'm going to put another diagonal. And so I will bring it this way, and I'll show you that with some hash marks. And that could just be darker sky right there. That helps to show off that white moon. And then maybe put just a little bit of this so that you can sort of see that cloud going that direction. Since my sketch is a little more complicated on this painting, I'm going to replicate it a bit on my painting paper with pencil. Our moon was up in this area, in that upper right-hand quadrant of sweet spot, and I'll lightly pencil the profile of that mountain, and I'll lightly profile the line of trees and the line of trees coming down, just a little bit of a pencil, and down here was where we were going to have our pathway meandering into our painting, drawing our viewer literally into the landscape, the magical world that we're creating. This moon, I am going to use some masking fluid to mask off, so I don't have to worry about trying to constantly keep that paper purely white right there. I have a circle template to help if you want help with a circle. Sometimes I just do this by hand to have a little bit of a rougher look to that moon, but this gives me a chance to really decide how big should it be to feel like it really helps kind of add a little spark to this composition. So I think this looks pretty decent. I just take a pencil and go ahead and pencil that circle in my template. And then I take some masking fluid and a brush that I don't care too much about. This is a inexpensive synthetic fibered brush, and it will rinse out. I can use it a bunch of times if I keep remembering to rinse it immediately after I use masking fluid. It's when you leave one laying around and you forget about it that you end up losing a brush. Taking masking fluid now and painting it just inside that circle, just up to the pencil. And I'm not trying to make it super thick or super thin, but just kind of medium. It helps, I think, to hold your hand so that I start kind of in the middle and I push out toward that pencil edge. So you kind of start in the middle of the camp and you move out to the peripheral edge where the the light barely reaches. That allows me to not flub up and kind of make a stroke that goes out onto the paper. I've just touched masking fluid all around inside that circle now, and I need to let that dry before I put any paint or water over the top of the surface. Okay, it'll take a few minutes for that masking fluid to dry. I touch it with my finger and it doesn't come off onto my finger. It still looks a little bit shiny and reflective though. And I remembered to rinse out that brush that I used, because otherwise you pretty much would have to toss it if that masking fluid dries in the bristles. I'm going to help myself by making a spectrum. I'm making a little palette for myself, thinking about the colors that I'm going to mix together for this painting. I think to start with, for my sky, I would like to have some drama involved in that, and I'm going to use a little bit of my Payne's gray, a pretty neutral gray color, and I think that'll help my sky be pretty dramatic. And then if I add a little bit of blue to it, it will help me create that mountain. So I'm going to take some Payne's gray, touch in a little bit of ultramarine, let's say, and that'll give me a little bit darker value than the sky and make a nice kind of peak in the background that doesn't take away too much of my viewer's attention, but rather it highlights the rest of this drama that's going on in front of us. Now we need to think of a way to have this bluish gray color move over towards green in the color spectrum, in the rainbow. In a way, with each painting, I am just taking a chunk out of the rainbow. I'm taking a bit of this color spectrum and making it sing. Let's get some medium yellow, and let's bring this bluish gray to it and see what we end up with here. We bring that in there. I'm going to start to get some interesting grayish, greenish color. And that kind of a green, I know it doesn't look like green out of a tube. There's no Hooker's green or sap green that looks like that. But when you talk about the green of nature and you say, oh, it was so beautiful, that spring was so green, it's not really the green that we have in our children's set of crayons. It's more subtle. It has more browns and blues in it. So I'm going to be fine with that. I think that's going to make a very beautiful and intriguing kind of natural painting. In this landscape, I'm going to kind of let go of my mental rules that I have to have the colors be the same exact colors that I notice in nature. And so I will not be afraid to dip into a little bit of cobalt turquoise to add to that blue, or a bit of viridian, which is a very almost like a dye-colored green. Let's see if I can make that sort of bleed into that blue as well. Don't forget, I'm not trying to just replicate natural colors here, but rather I'm trying to create a beautiful pattern on a piece of two-dimensional paper. It's arbitrary in a sense. It's coming out of my imagination, not from my camera. Okay, with that spectrum kind of taken care of in my mind, I'm ready to start seeing what can happen on this paper. Okay, let's remember from our sketch that the value of these background elements, the sky and the mountain in the distance, are much lighter values than what we're going to be having down in our sweet spot at the bottom left corner, or this dark band of trees coming in from the right side. So I want to paint those first, and I'd like them to be light and possibly a little bit atmospheric, a little bit soft edges. So I'll start with my paper wet for this upper part, and I think I'm going to let it dry after I just get this top part done and let that really set into the fibers of the paper. So let's get going on our paper here by getting it wet first for this sky and mountain. I'm going to bring my water, my clean water, using a flat 1-inch brush. I'm going to bring it down below the tree line, so it's below the mountain and below the first layer of trees. I'm going horizontally first all the way across. I cover right over that masking fluid moon, and now I go vertically. That helps me catch any little streaks strips that I might have missed with my clean water. Okay, my paper is damp now. I'm going to use my round number 12 that has soft bristled brush, get some of that Payne's gray into my sky. I'm going to make my first band of that sky go right over the moon, and I can just run it right into the mountain. I'm not worried about crossing that line because this is going to be a lighter value than the mountain. I think I better soak up a little bit of it, having said that, because that was getting pretty dark down there. Now, with some clean water, I'm going to just touch the edge of that band of dark sky, and again here, and I want there not to be any hard-edged lines in that sky. See, I've got a hard edge right there. Some of the paper is drying intermittently. I want that not to be there. So I take clean water and wash right over that hard edge. Here, I'll just bring it across, and that's going to be a pretty soft sky. Well, I must have caught a little bit of yellow in from my practice there. But all this stuff down below, I don't want to leave any hard edges because those will come back to haunt me later. So I just go ahead and touch some clean water in there, clean paper towel, mop some of that up that's inside the mountain. And I think I'm going to take my misting bottle and just mist over that sky area. Let some of those patterns bleed together and not look harsh. I actually touched this with a paper towel in a way that makes it look a little awkward. I think I'm going to just let a little bit more Payne's gray flood in there. Hit it again with my misting bottle. I'm going to just let this dry. At each stage of the game, I have decisions to make, and right now my decision is really about how soft I want the edge of this mountain profile to look. Do you want it to be really crisp, or do you want it to be sort of vague, almost difficult for your eye to tell? Is it rock? Is it tree line? Is this a mountain in the Rocky Mountains, which has tundra up above 12,000? Is that the sort of mountain we're talking about? I'm going to leave it a little bit vague, but have a pretty clean line on here. So I'm going to put clean water below this line so that when I paint this mountain, it doesn't leave a hard edge down at the bottom that gives me problems when I'm trying to paint the forest. So I'm going to just take some clean water first and just hit this. I'm using the pencil to guide me, keeping underneath the profile of the mountain range with that clean water. Now I'm touching into my Payne's gray plus some of that ultramarine, and I'm creating a mix of that. I'm taking some of all that watery pigment out of there so it's not overwhelming when I hit this paper with it. Okay, again, Payne's gray, ultramarine, and I'm wicking out some of the water using a paper towel laid right by the ferrule of the brush, but not touching the tip of the bristles. Now I'm going to pull my brush along that line, and underneath my pencil profile line, I'm going to go up, hit the peak of that mountain. It comes down a ways, it goes back up to a little secondary peak, and across the bottom, I'm going to pull that pigment with my brush so that I don't leave an edge down at the bottom. I'm going to touch it now with some clean water. And it's okay if I go clear over into this where I've got my pencil line shows me that I'm going to have some trees there. Okay, let's take a look at how that's drying. Well, not perfect. I can tell the quality of my paper a little bit right now because it's drying in unevenly. It's the top of my mountain looks more dry than down here. I'm going to do it one more time. I really don't like to do this too much. I don't want to overwork it, but I am going to hit this once more to kind of integrate all this mountain a little bit. As that dries, I think I'm going to take fairly fine round brush and just touch a little darker bit of pigment, a little bit more Payne's gray and ultramarine mixture, and put it on the dark side of my mountain. And let's think about that. So the moon's over here. It's going to be shining this way. This side of my mountain should be lighter. And I want to emphasize that by putting a little darker pigment over on the other side of the mountain. Partly trying to overcome some of the unevenness that I noticed in the way that mountain was drying. Again, I'll put a little more pigment over here, all the way up to the peak and down. And then this peak would have a little darkness on this side and down. And as it dries, I just keep kind of touching it in, playing around with it so that it dries in a way that I like. I'm going to lift a little bit of paint on that edge with a clean brush. I don't know what's going on here. That somehow dried kind of weird right there, but I'll just touch in some more pigment. Okay, while my mountain was drying, you could see that I sometimes misted. I sometimes added a little bit more pigment. I sometimes take clean water and touch into places to kind of obscure some of the things that look a little contrived or like too much of a hard line. I just am enjoying that creative process during that time, not trying to push too hard any one direction, just sort of see what the paint does. I'm responding to the crisis of the moment. As John Singer Sargent said, it's making the most of an emergency, and it all is emergency. Once you start putting paint down on this paper, things just get out of control, out of your strict control. If you're painting this way, the experimental way and the loose way, I'm trying to touch places that I see too much contrivance, too much of a spot that looks like I was really trying hard to make that look like a rock or a tree or a mountain. I'm just letting it look like a design on the paper. I want this to be fairly dry now, just so that I don't have to worry about this mountain anymore. And now I'm going to put in a layer of trees, a sort of a foothill in this side. And remember our sketch, the left-hand side under the mountain was going to be a lighter value than the right side where this dark band of trees is going to be coming in from the right. Now, while I do this, I'm going to be working quickly and I'm going to be getting a lot of pigment onto my paper. It'll flow later. It'll have time to kind of reveal itself in a little bit. But to start with, I want you to think about my bottom edge first. I'm going to put this band of trees in, but the bottom edge, I'm going to keep it soft, let it stay runny, and I'm going to put a lighter color into the spot where these darker trees comes down. The bottom edge of those dark trees, I want to have light. I want to have some light green, some yellows, some tan colors, some earthy colors that maybe have a chance to bleed up into the base of those trees to make this edge here be really interesting, not something that I meticulously paint with a little brush, but rather I let the paint do the work and flow in an interesting way. So to do that, I'm using a bigger brush. I'm going to take my 1-inch flat and I'm going to get some of my yellow into it. I'm going to create a puddle of yellow. I'm going to touch a little bit of olive green into it so that I have a light green color at my ready when I end up doing the foreground with these trees above. And I'm actually going to put a little bit of raw sienna in there so it doesn't just look like green out of the box. Let's get some clean water on here first, and I'll use my 1-inch flat again, and I'm actually going to put water all down in this foreground area, and then also up to where I have that kind of weird looking soft edge at the bottom of the mountain where the trees will actually go up into that, okay? And I'll have some water over on this right side, but I'm not quite ready to hit that, but there could be an emergency that requires me to hit it soon. Let's see. Okay, I am going to work with my big 1-inch flat. I'm going to get some, let's see what I'm doing here. I'm using some ultramarine blue. I'm going to use some sap green and a little bit of olive green and a little brown. So I'm using actually some sepia, okay? And this is a fairly dark greenish color. It's got some blue in it. It's got some of that yellow in it. And I'm going to take my brush now, and instead of painting across the flat way, I'm going to go up with some vertical strokes up into that area where I've got that bottom edge of the mountain. And I'm using the brush by sort of almost flicking it sideways. And you can see that those thin bristles, all lined up, are creating kind of like a treetop up underneath that mountain. Okay, I'll move my way downward now, and hopefully some of that area will look a little bit like mist kind of settling into the valleys up there between this forest and the mountain. And I really am desperately needing to reload my brush here. So I'm just going to rinse and reload. I've got this puddle of this blue, green, brown mixture here. And I don't really care if I'm matching this perfectly, but I can see that I need a little darker pigment coming up here. It's a little browner than my original mixture, it looks like. I'll kind of bring a little bit of it over here so it looks pretty unified. And again, I'm going to now start angling downward over here. And now you can really tell what you did before with that. If you left an edge that was too strong like I did, you're going to have more trouble covering it up. You're going to need to add a little more blue to the mix, maybe a little more of that sepia, and have a little darker treetops here so that you don't see that line where it dried at the base of the mountain. Okay, I'm getting over into the territory where those trees from the other side are going to be coming in. I'm going to touch this bottom edge here with some clean water, and you can tell where it hit dry paper, it's going to leave more of a mark. So I want to break that up a little bit with some clean water. And now I'm going to take my mixture that I did a little earlier of the yellow, the raw sienna, and I'm going to stroke that into the foreground and right up to where those trees touch. Going to even get more yellow in there, maybe even a little bit of lemon yellow in there, and right under those trees. I want that to create a sort of green, but created mostly because it's yellow and blue touching each other. Now I can throw a little more of this darker green into a few parts of this foreground, and I'm letting him just do this while it's all wet. So this is all soft stuff here that we're creating. And I think a little bit brighter green, using some olive green, a little bit of lemon yellow mixed into it. A real spring-like green will be down in here too. This is actually where my pathway is going to lead into the mountains. So I'll have that lighter green touched in there. And this side, it's okay with me if this is more darker down over here with more earth color where my trail is going to come out of. With my rigger, I'm going to use that light green right at the base of these trees here and bring that right down like a mountain slope over on this side. I'm letting the paint be wet and run up into whatever those trees are doing up there. Okay, well, I wanted to have a pathway, and you can see I don't have a pathway. I've just painted everything solid. The way I'm going to get that pathway is by lifting, and I'm going to use my flat 1/2 inch rinsed in clean water, and I'm going to go back in here and lift out a little bit of this paint. Notice that I'm lifting by going across the paper. I'm drawing a little bit of a horizontal line by moving those bristles from left to right rather than up and down, and that's just letting there be a little bit of light into my landscape. I don't want this path to just be a straight line. Most trails aren't straight. They're not like highways. They're going to meander based on the landscape, based on the ups and downs of these slopes here. So if I create this path by a series of horizontals, it ends up looking more realistic, a little more natural. And I really do not need to make this perfect. I want it to just kind of wander a little bit, kind of to the left and to the right. And then eventually, I'm just going to let it kind of run into this, whatever this lower right-hand corner of foreground is, which right now, I think I will hit with just a little bit more of that sepia and raw sienna, so some browns. And I'm going to keep it sort of vague about what happens to this path. We are going to hit these trees on the right-hand side fairly quickly here. Where are they going to go? Let's see. I think they're going to be closer to us. They're going to be over the top of these trees in the back, so they need to be darker than those. And I think that I need to create this tree background to be a little more varied, a little more variegated. I'm going to touch into this with a paper towel. It's just looking a little too uniform. I want it to have a little more variety. So I'll do that to start with by touching it with a paper towel. That kind of gives variety to this part of the foreground too, and I like that. It was just looking a little too fake. Now I'm going to mist it with my misting bottle, and I'm going to take my rigger and just add a little bit of variety of color in here and value by taking a little more Prussian blue, darker blue, and I'm just going to give a few verticals in here just to create a little bit of a pattern that's kind of breaks up this monotony of those trees looking like they were all just kind of lined up the same. And right down here where that trail goes over into the abyss, right here, I would like to have it darker behind there to make that more dramatic. The trail will be light, the trees in the back will be dark. And I kind of want to bring some of these trees down even farther, I think, and that'll give us a nice bottom edge here. Because that bottom edge, I wasn't crazy about it. Nice and dark over here, but all the way down to this edge where there's some interesting greens created with that yellow, brown, blue combination. Now, every once in a while, just to let our viewers get a little bit more information, give them a little stronger suggestion that this is a forest, I'm going to put a tree that's a little bit more detailed. And I might do that. I could do some of that right over here. These trees look a little bit too fake where I made them with the edge of my big flat brush. So I'm just going to throw one tree in there like that and one right up here. Using my rigger, making little side branches, getting away from that kind of fake looking edge, the stroke tops from the flat 1-inch brush. Just make these tree tops be a little more intriguing. These trees will be way back there. These trees may be closer to my viewer, so I'll get a little darker pigment into this part. Now, I'm going to need to let this dry before I can put much more detail in there. It's getting a little bit out of control. And again, on this side, I'm going to bring some of these trees down farther. That I'm a little happier with. Let's think about this other side now. I have a feeling we're going to have a little bit of a mess on our hands. I can see the paper is wrinkled a little bit. Again, I'm using fairly inexpensive paper here. That's one of the prices that you pay. Better paper that has been stretched and let dry on my board nice and flat would not be doing this much buckling, but we can make this work. I'm going to really get some pigment in here fairly quickly, so I want to use my big brush again and do sort of the same thing that I did before, but it's got to be at least as dark, if not darker, pigment. So I'm using Prussian blue, sap green, sepia. And now this is going to get covered up a little bit. It doesn't look very realistic right now, and I'm going to make that happen a little bit better. This is getting dry, and I need to activate it a little bit. I think what I'm going to put some light green, some olive green with some lemon yellow mixed into it, a little bit higher up here, and we'll have to kind of figure out what happens to this trail, but I feel like this trail is really, I think I put that in a little prematurely. Note to self, let's put the trail in at the very end. I think it'll be a lot better solution to our problems here. Okay, now I can put those darker trees in and let them kind of run into that lighter color. Prussian, sepia, sap green, and flood this baby. I'm really trying to think about covering these back trees with darker trees, but not destroying all my background mountain there, not going over that too much. I'm going to work my way up this way. This is just kind of telling me where these are going to go. I'm not worried about making some perfect trees here. And now I can flood this in with some pigment. And this is where I could really play around. I can actually have various colors that bleed and drip and look beautiful. I'm not super worried about realism right now on this part. I'm going to get a smaller brush, this one round that comes to a pretty fine point, and I'm going to get more Prussian and sepia in there, darker, and get some bands of darker pigment and then some bands of lighter value. Let's see what happens where I've been covering up this stuff here. Again, I want the bottom edge to be intriguing and be created by paint, not by me. So I'm going to get some lighter colors in here. This is going to be medium yellow, olive green, and I'm going to just go ahead and go over this spot where I have that running all the way up into those trees. To help kind of balance my painting a little bit, I got to put a little bit of that over on this side. Smaller, finer pointed brush and get some of that sepia and Prussian dark stuff down into here so that this background spot can bleed up a little bit into it. Let's just put a little bit of that darker stuff over here. But I'm leaving some of these things to just bleed together. That's great. That's fine with me. Okay, now I have to think about this top line. It's where I've got dry paper, so whatever I do up here is going to stay. I'm going to get that dark Prussian and sepia again. And these, starting over here, these look a little fake to me. So let's get those trees fixed up a little bit. And every once in a while, you'll notice that I'll just put a straight, thin vertical line, like a dead tree, a snag out there. It helps the design really sing a little bit. It's a little bit ironic that a dead snag can actually bring life to your painting. So I'm really trying to get some drippy stuff to happen down in here, but I've got to have the top tell people that, oh, it's trees there. And so that's why I'm kind of taking some time with my rigger to get those tops in, and then let this bottom stuff just drip and bleed downward. I'm gonna now spray it and even tip my board so that we can let that kind of run down, because that's the drippy kind of unexpected serendipitous stuff that we just don't know what's going to happen yet. Let me move these waters out of the way, spray this a little bit, and I know this will be a little bit hard to see on camera, but I'm going to tip the board towards me and let these bleed down and get all drippy on me. You can just take a little bucket or a little roll of masking tape or something and put it behind your board to prop it up a little bit. And I'm now, as this dries, I'm not trying to completely tell the paint what to do, but rather I'm just adding to it a little bit, maybe putting a little bit more patterns that I think will add some intrigue in there, filling a few little gaps, putting a few tops on some trees that just look like a blunt instrument painted them, like I painted it with a hammer. This is all still pretty wet, and I've used my misting bottle quite a bit, which helps give this mottled look to it. And again, I'm not even too worried about absolutely perfect natural color. I've got some turquoise that's kind of lingering in here. I might even hit a tree in there using cobalt turquoise. So let this just have a little bit of a tree pattern, some branches with turquoise. I'm going to mist this foreground as well. We've experimented with some salt before. You could sprinkle a little bit of salt on here. That'd be pretty fun. We've experimented with a toothbrush. I might take my toothbrush now and just pick up a little bit of that light brown color that I made using raw sienna with a little bit of sepia in it. I'm going to just rub my toothbrush in my puddle like this, and then I knock it out over my puddle a little bit so that I don't just have tons of pigment that's going to just splatter every place, but rather it'll give me a little bit of a finer set of dots. Here's a practice sheet next to it. When I hit the toothbrush, you can see the kind of speckles I'll get, so that gives me a chance to practice on the side. And I'm going to just speckle some of this down here so that it gives the impression that we have a rough surface, gravelly kind of rocky surface that this trail is going to head over. The brush that's going to help me get a little bit of this foreground planted with some shrubs or some scrubby growth, some grasses and some sagebrush, is a fan brush. And we've experimented with those before, but this time I'm going to load them up with fairly dark color. It's going to be brown, it's going to be sepia with a little bit of sap green in it, a little bit of raw sienna in it. And again, I want to practice on the side a little bit, so I'll put my little experiment page next to it. And that's super full of pigment, so you don't really see very much line work, but as it dries, you'll see a lot more. And that's where I'm ready now to put some grasses coming out of some of this scruffy foreground, okay? Again, this is kind of working where I take some dark pigment and I can cover over some lighter. I have it show off by going over some lighter color. By the trail, I'm having the grasses lead people down the trail. I use it to kind of help define where the trail goes. It's kind of like the grass points the way here. Now, towards us, of course, the grasses would be larger, so I'll reload, get some of that sap green, some of that sepia, do a test, and get some larger grasses going up here towards the foreground. In the distance, they'd be lighter, smaller, farther away. Don't even have to be too careful over here. It's so vague and distant, and I'm using a really light value, soft strokes. This is still fairly wet over here, so that's just going to all kind of blend together. I think we're ready for pretty much final touches on this. I need to let it dry, and I notice I definitely have to fix up my trail a little bit, but I'm going to start with just a little more pigment down there and let that dry. Now that this is dried, I'm ready to put some of the final touches on. The thing that's really motivating this last stage is that I want, as many times as I can, I want to add some variety, because remember, variety is what's going to bring our painting alive. That means I want contrasts between darks and lights, small shapes and large shapes, and just the overall design of the painting. We can start by taking the masking off of our moon, and I just take my not so clean finger and I rub that masking fluid right off of that spot spot. And I'm going to just take a look at how that came out. Not too bad. I can take a rigger or a small brush and just soften that edge a little bit. I'm softening with some clean water just at the edge where I have that stark kind of brutal edge of the moon. So it just softens that a little bit. Clean water and a clean paper towel and touch that moon. Okay. Again, I want contrasts. I want variety. So I'm going to throw a few trees in that are lighter, and I'm going to have these kind of a design coming down from this moon, I think. Just add sort of an interesting aspect to the design. I'm using my 1/2-inch flat brush, pulled down the long way so that all the bristles are lined up to help suck up some pigment on some of these verticals. That's probably enough right there. Maybe one more tiny one. Okay, that's fine. Over here, I want some darks to tell a little more of a story and help give it a little bit of depth to this situation we've got where this trail is going to head up into the high country. Okay, so I'm using my darkest combo. That's the Prussian blue mixed with sepia. And let's put a tree that's actually closer to our viewer. So I'm going to put the trunk coming clear down into this grass stuff right there. And that tree is going to be kind of maybe telling people that the trails goes right over here. How high should it be? That's your call. It's a judgment call. Up at the top, I'm not going to have too much branch stuff, but this is helping to frame my whole trail, my whole painting really. And rarely would there be a single tree just hanging out by itself there, although it happens. This one I'm going to have give it a little bit of company. And I'm going to just darken some of this down here so that this gives a sense of depth, because I'm actually creating sort of a series of layers that are going to help people enter into this painting. What we're really doing is almost making a stage. We're making a drama. These things are leading your eye using dark and light. It still feels to me like it needs some more weight kind of coming over this way, which would indicate that this tree is actually bigger and maybe comes down a little bit more like this. Okay, so just I'm putting a little more dark value into that tree. And we could certainly do the same on the other side, or we could think about maybe not try to upstage that one too much, but put a tree over here that kind of indicates the edge of this whole forest, really. And I'm putting the darker pigment over the top of that lighter background stuff there. And don't have to have trunks. I'm just going to put some branch kind of suggestions in here. You can really see that Prussian blue is really what's on my brush mostly now, and it gives kind of a nice look right there. When in doubt, I use my mister. Obliterate. Make it interesting. Give it some speckly pattern stuff. And this is feeling a little bit awkward. I still feel like I need some more darker trees back in this part. Pretty abstract. I'm just throwing down some verticals and throwing some branches, but it'll suggest it to my viewer, and that's all I need to do. I'm going to go back to my fan again, my fan brush, and get a little darker value to punch out some of these grasses, and I'll show you what I mean. Let's use this front foreground grass. This is a very, I would say, mid-range value, kind of medium dark. So we want to still save some of that. I'm not just going over the top of it and covering it up, but I'm putting some darker darks down at the bottom, down at the base, and going up into the lighter stuff. Okay, and see if you can tell how that really gives it some good variety. So darker down at the base, and mix it up. I can make a different mixture. I could have some more sap green in there. Right in this area, I had some medium value. Now I'm going to have a little bit of dark. I go just down at the base and start it up into those other grasses. So anytime that you have two layers instead of one, it's going to be more interesting. And this is giving me a second value layer. Nice and dark. This looks like it really needs more back in there. One thing I should say out loud, I just think of this in my own mind. As I'm doing this, I'm sort of creating triangles. I'm creating these little paths that kind of come down towards our path. And that's helping to sort of like form the landscape. Now let's just look at our path for a second. I'm mostly going to have it tell a story by what I have taken away. So I'm using clean water and my 1/2-inch flat, and I'm drawing off some of this pigment. I'm going to make it the most contrast right down down here where the path goes away from our view. You can't really tell what it's doing. It's going around the corner, okay? The rest of this is fine. I feel like it's too white right here. In real life, that's gonna not be white like the moon. It's gonna be lighter colored, but at the edges of this, I'm gonna make some, I'm taking my flat 1/2 inch brush with some of that light brown. That's got some raw sienna and some sepia. And I'm gonna just make some little strokes, but again, notice I'm going into the trail. I'm coming from the side and I go in towards the trail. It's like creating little wedges that go in there in order to create a little more of a look of that being actually the earth or textured ground there. And if I add even a little bit more of the light yellow to it, a little bit of raw sienna to it, and touch some water. This is looking a little fake right here, so I'm just touching some clean water and kind of making that trail soft. I don't want to have hard lines to worry about inside that trail, and covering up some of that white. Now I could maybe even put a few stones in there. This is mostly because I'm adding a sort of a design element. Let's see. If I drop this and the paper's pretty wet, it's actually going to make a little bloom of like some sage or some bunch grass of some sort there. And again, it's going in towards the trail, those little wedges. Obscure it when in doubt, get the mist out. So this looks like it happened by accident. That's my goal. I think we're pretty darn close. Something's weird right there, and I'm not sure what that was, but I'm going to get it out of there and put a little bit of light green down in this area and let that bleed up into the trees. Okay, that's it. We're going to stop. We're going to say that painting is finished. You know, to be honest, I don't really love this painting, but that's okay. I can fix a few of the elements here. There's ways to manipulate the paint a little bit more later, and I go into those in further experiments. So in another lesson, let's take this painting and make some adjustments. In one essay, Rilke encouraged us to get out into the woods, and he wrote, "To draw near to nature, and then try, like some first human being, to say what you see, and experience, and love." Hi, I'm Bob. Thanks for watching this video. I hope you'll go by my website at watercolorwithbob.com. That's where you'll find an interactive outline of the whole course. You can also share your work with me and your fellow students. One thing I really love about watercolor is how accessible it is. That's why I realized it was important to me to put this course out for free. That said, it would mean the world to me if you would support this work. You can like it, you could share it with your friends, you could subscribe to the channel, you could also visit the gift shop or even make a donation. Thanks so much. See you on the next lesson, and happy painting. Maybe we'll be able to cover that part with the frame a little bit.